In the heart of northern Ontario lies Crystal Lake, a place once known for its beauty, now remembered for its darkness. When 28-year-old photographer Lena Cartwright was found dead beneath its still waters, investigators uncovered a trail leading to a man who shouldn't exist. Daniel Mercer, a photographer declared dead years earlier. Drawn into the mystery, retired detective Robert Hill exposed chilling connections between their lives, their art, and their obsession with reflections. What began as one woman's disappearance became Canada's most bizarre murder mystery, where truth, death, and identity blur like ripples on the lake's surface. It was early October 2012 when the quiet town of Pineview, Ontario, woke to the echo of sirens slicing through the cold morning air. The town, surrounded by endless forests and the glassy stillness of Crystal Lake, rarely made headlines. Life there moved slowly, predictably, until that morning when a fisherman's shout shattered the peace. Floating near the shore, tangled in reeds, was the body of 28-year-old Lena Cartwright. Lena had been a familiar face in Pineview, known for her talent behind the camera. She had moved to the area a year earlier to capture Canada's untouched wilderness for an independent photography project. Her social media pages were filled with hauntingly beautiful images. Mist drifting across the lake, deer moving silently between birch trees, sunsets reflected on still water. She was passionate, curious, and brave enough to explore places that made others uneasy. 3 days before her body was found, Lena had posted what would be her final photograph, a golden-hued image of the lake at dusk with the caption, "Last light before something big." At the time it seemed poetic, another piece of her artistry. No one realized it would soon sound like a warning. When she didn't return home that night, her friends assumed she was camping out in the woods, something she did often. But when her canoe was found overturned near the northern shore, police were called in. At first glance, everything pointed to a tragic accident. Autumn storms often rolled in quickly, and the lake could turn violent in minutes. It wasn't unusual for experienced paddlers to misjudge its calmness. Investigators thought Lena had drowned after her canoe tipped over in rough water. Her gear bag and tripod were missing, but that wasn't unusual either. Strong currents could easily have pulled them away. However, the coroner's report told a different story. Lena hadn't simply drowned. She had a deep wound on the back of her head, consistent with being struck by something heavy before entering the water. The impact had likely knocked her unconscious, leaving her unable to fight for her life. Suddenly, the peaceful lake had become the scene of a crime. The discovery stunned the residents of Pineview. For a town with a population of fewer than 1,000, violent crime was almost unheard of. Everyone began questioning what could have happened out there in the mist. Had Lena met someone by the water that night? Was it a random act of violence or something more personal? Police scoured the shoreline and surrounding forest. They found boot prints leading toward the woods, but the rain had blurred them beyond recognition. A torn piece of camera strap was found caught in a branch. Perhaps hers, perhaps not. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, and no immediate suspects. As autumn deepened, the mystery only grew darker. The lake that once drew photographers and tourists became a place of whispers and fear. Locals began avoiding it altogether, claiming that at dusk they could still see ripples moving across the surface, as if someone were there, just beneath the water, waiting to be found again. The investigation into Lena Cartwright's death intensified in the weeks following the discovery of her body. Detectives combed through every lead, but most trails went cold almost immediately. Then, one afternoon, a search team stumbled upon something unexpected. A narrow dirt path hidden behind a wall of cedar trees near the northern edge of the lake. It wasn't marked on any map. The trail twisted deep into the forest, eventually leading to an old wooden cabin that looked as if it hadn't been lived in for years. The cabin stood silent beneath the weight of the trees, its roof sagging under years of snow and neglect. Dust-coated windows reflected no light, and the door creaked open at the gentlest touch. Inside, The air was heavy with dampness and decay. Yet despite its abandoned appearance, there were signs that someone had been there recently. A half-burnt candle sat on the windowsill. Fresh footprints marked the wooden floor, and on one of the tables lay a stack of photographs that made the investigators' skin crawl. The photographs were all of the surrounding forest, the lake, the tall pines, the paths that wound through the woods. At first glance, they appeared to be Lena's work. She had often shared similar shots online, but as the officers flipped through them, they noticed something disturbing. In several of the images, Lena herself appeared in the background, small, blurred, unaware that she was being photographed. Someone had been following her. One photo stood out more than the rest. It showed Lena standing by the lake with her camera raised, the evening sun casting a golden glow over the water. But behind her, almost hidden in the shadows of the trees, was a faint silhouette of a man. The figure was out of focus, but his presence was unmistakable. Tall, motionless, watching her. The police soon discovered that the cabin wasn't entirely abandoned. Records showed it had been rented years earlier by a man named Daniel Mercer. His name sparked interest immediately. Mercer had been accused of stalking a woman in Toronto in 2010, but disappeared before any charges were filed. His car had later been found in a frozen river, and after months of searching, he was declared legally dead. The coincidence was too strange to ignore. The photos, the location, the eerie similarities to his past, it all suggested that Mercer might somehow be connected to Lena's death. But if he truly had died years earlier, who was living in his cabin now? As police dug deeper, they found signs that someone had been staying there recently. Food wrappers, cigarette butts, and a torn jacket were discovered near the back door. Fingerprint tests came back inconclusive, and no DNA matched anyone in the system. It was as though the person had carefully erased their identity. The discovery of the cabin shifted the entire direction of the case. What had seemed like an isolated murder now appeared part of something far stranger. And though investigators left that day with boxes of evidence, one question haunted them all. If Daniel Mercer was dead, then who had been watching Lena Cartwright? Through the trees? Lena's laptop became the next focus of the investigation. It was found in her small lakeside cottage, sitting on her desk as if she had just stepped out for a moment. The computer was still open, and the last activity showed she had been editing photos just hours before she disappeared. Her camera equipment, however, was missing. Investigators hoped the digital files would reveal something, but what they uncovered only deepened the mystery. Inside her email drafts, police found several unsent messages written in the days leading up to her death. They were fragmented, uneasy, and filled with subtle hints of fear. In one message, Lena described feeling watched during her photo trips near the lake. She wrote that she had heard footsteps snapping branches behind her, but found no one when she turned around. Another draft mentioned that her motion sensor light outside the cabin had been turning on in the middle of the night, even when no animals were around. She seemed to be debating whether to tell the police or dismiss it as paranoia. Her final draft ended mid-sentence, with the words, "I think I finally know who," followed by nothing. It was saved only a few hours before her phone signal went dead. The abrupt ending sent chills through the detectives. It was as if something or someone had interrupted her before she could finish typing. Forensic experts continued digging into her digital footprint, eventually locating the memory card from her missing camera. It had been found weeks later by a fisherman near the dam at the far end of the lake, caught inside a tangled fishing net. Despite water damage, some images were still recoverable. The photos were a disturbing timeline of her final hours. The first few images were typical of her work: quiet landscapes, fading light on the water, and the glow of autumn trees. But as the series continued, the photos became erratic. The frames grew darker and less focused, as if she had been moving quickly or in panic. One shot showed the beam of a flashlight cutting through thick trees. Another captured what appeared to be her own reflection in the lake. except behind her reflection was a second shape, faint but unmistakably human. The final image was the most haunting. It showed the forest floor covered in leaves, blurred by motion. In the lower corner of the frame, a pale hand reached toward the camera lens. The timestamp matched the precise minute her phone went offline. When investigators examined the photo's metadata, they found that the GPS tag placed her at the northern edge of Crystal Lake, just a few hundred meters from where her body was later recovered. There was no record of anyone else being in that area that night. The evidence painted a terrifying picture. Lena hadn't just vanished by accident. She had known she was being followed, tried to document it, and likely captured her own final moments. Yet the most baffling question remained. If the figure in her photos wasn't Daniel Mercer, then who was the man still lurking around the lake 2 years after his supposed death? Months passed, but the mystery of Lena Cartwright's death refused to fade. The story drew national attention, capturing the imagination of true crime enthusiasts and unsettling the residents of Pineview, who still struggled to accept that such horror had unfolded in their peaceful town. Then, a retired detective named Robert Hill came forward with information that would reopen the case and twist it into something even more disturbing. Hill had worked on the disappearance of Daniel Mercer back in 2010, 2 years before Lena's death. After hearing about the newly discovered cabin and the strange photographs, he immediately noticed patterns that others had overlooked. Mercer's old case and Lena's murder shared uncanny similarities. Both victims were photographers, both had vanished near water, and both had left behind collections of photos filled with reflections. Lakes, windows, mirrors. Hill called it a pattern of obsession. Mercer had reportedly been fascinated by how reflections distorted reality, capturing what he once described as the hidden version of the world. The retired detective proposed what he called the mirror theory. He believed Mercer had staged his own death and continued living under a false identity, hiding in remote areas and targeting people who shared his artistic fixations. If true, Lena might have become his final subject, a victim chosen not at random, but because her work mirrored his own. Investigators initially dismissed the theory as speculation until they discovered something that changed everything. During a scheduled drain of part of Crystal Lake, divers uncovered a sunken car buried beneath layers of silt. It was an old blue sedan, rusted and almost unrecognizable, but its license plate matched the one registered to Daniel Mercer, the same car that had been pulled from the frozen river years earlier. When forensic teams examined the interior, they found something horrifying. 2 sets of skeletal remains lay inside. One was identified as Mercer through dental records, confirming that he had indeed died back in 2010. But the second set belonged to an unknown person, a man whose identity remains unconfirmed to this day. The discovery shattered the mirror theory's foundation, yet raised even stranger questions. If Mercer had been dead all along, who had been living in his cabin? Who had taken the photos of Lena? And how did they possess Mercer's distinctive photographic style? The evidence suggested that someone else had been imitating him, or continuing his work. Locals began whispering new versions of the story. Some believed Mercer's death had inspired a copycat, perhaps someone from Pineview who admired his disturbing artistry. Others claimed the lake itself was cursed, drawing those with an obsession for reflections to their doom. But no theory could explain the impossible. Several of Lena's recovered photos contained faint images of a man who looked exactly like Mercer, standing in places taken long after his confirmed death. Investigators could never explain how those images existed. Whether they were manipulated, double-exposed, or something unearthly, no one could say. But the unease it created was undeniable. The case had crossed from a criminal mystery into something that defied logic, a haunting reminder that some stories refuse to stay buried beneath the water. Spring returned to Pineview, but the sense of unease that had settled over the town never lifted. The investigation into Lena Cartwright's death had gone quiet, leaving more questions than answers. Crystal Lake, once a destination for campers and photographers, now stood empty. Locals claimed it felt different, colder, heavier, as if the water itself carried memories it refused to release. The case seemed to have reached its end until a new discovery reopened it one final time. A hiker exploring the forest north of the lake stumbled upon a rusted tin box, half buried beneath the roots of a fallen tree. Inside was a small roll of undeveloped film wrapped in a piece of plastic and sealed with tape. The hiker turned it over to the police, unaware of what he had found. When the photos were developed, they revealed scenes of Crystal Lake taken many years before Lena's death. The angles, lighting, and framing were strikingly similar to her work. Investigators compared the style to Daniel Mercer's early photographs, and the resemblance was undeniable. The final photo on the roll was the most unsettling. It showed the lake on a foggy morning. Standing at the edge of the water was a man, tall, motionless, facing the reflection of himself in the still surface. But when examined closely, experts noticed something strange. The reflection in the water didn't match the man's posture. It stood slightly turned, as though watching him rather than mirroring him. Even more chilling was what came next. When the photo was compared side by side with Lena's last known image, the figure's outline was almost identical to hers. The same stance, the same distance from the shore, the same tilt of the head. It was as if she had unknowingly recreated a photograph taken decades earlier, stepping into a scene that had already been captured long before she was born. This discovery reignited the mirror theory in a new, eerie form. Some believed Lena had become obsessed with Mercer's work and had subconsciously followed his footsteps, retracing his images without realizing it. Others argued something darker was at play, that whoever had continued Mercer's photography after his death had been guiding her, manipulating her through unseen means. No evidence ever proved either theory, but the coincidence was impossible to ignore. The cabin was burned down a year later after vandals broke in, and most of the evidence was lost forever. Only the photographs and Lena's recovered memory card remain as silent witnesses to whatever truly happened at Crystal Lake. Despite modern forensic analysis and years of research, no one has been able to explain the presence of Mercer's image in Lena's photos taken after his confirmed death. Today, visitors still claim to see flashes of light over the water at night, like a camera going off deep in the trees. Locals avoid the area, and those who venture near say the air feels heavy, as if the forest is watching. The official case remains unsolved, closed without conclusion. But those who have studied it agree on one thing: somewhere between Lena's lens and Mercer's reflection lies a truth too strange for reason, a story forever frozen in the surface of Crystal Lake. The mystery of Lena Cartwright and Daniel Mercer remains one of Canada's most haunting unsolved cases, a chilling story where art, obsession, and death intertwine. Even after years, no one can explain how Mercer's image appeared in photos taken long after his confirmed death. Crystal Lake stands silent, holding its secrets beneath the water's surface, a reminder that some truths refuse to be buried. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real unsolved mysteries. Share your theory in the comments. What do you think really happened at Crystal Lake?